Yup. This is the HVAC School Podcast. I'm Bryan. This is the podcast that helps you remember some things you might have forgotten along the way, as well as helps you remember some things you forgot to know in the first place. And today's short Q&A episode comes from Manly. That's literally the manliest name you can have. And he asked kind of a hot button question about, or I shouldn't say maybe hot button, but a loaded question, a question that could easily wind up with me getting canceled. But I think it's an honest one, and it's one I think we have to ask, and it's good to ask it out loud rather than just being quiet about it and not discussing it openly. So it's a good question, but before we do that, let's hear from our great sponsors. Don't miss the absolutely essential event in ACHR, the AHR Expo 2025, coming to Orlando, February 10th through 12th. Explore the latest product advancements, best practices, and industry trends, and I'll be there, of course. Register now for free at ahrexpo.com. Carrier and Carrier.com. I've been a Carrier dealer for many years. Carrier has their new Greenspeed Extreme super high efficiency heat pumps out on the market now. Find out more by going to Carrier.com. Refrigeration Technologies at refridgetech.com. The NAVAC NX1 Nexus Digital Manifold Gauge. Compatible with over 72 refrigerants, including the newly popular A2L refrigerants that we keep talking about, R32 and R454B. Among the highest accuracy manifold gauges in the industry, they offer a clear digital display, giving you precise readings at a glance, and they integrate with the MyNAVAC app, NAVAC temperature probes, and NAVAC's premium micron gauge. So now you can monitor system pressure, temperature, and vacuum all in one app. To find out more, go to hvacrschool.com/NX1 or go to navacglobal.com. Here's the question from Manly.
Hey there, everybody. My name is Manly Arneson, and I just had a question about cultural diversity. We had just recently brought on a worker from another country. He doesn't speak the greatest English. His English is pretty good, but it's not always the best. And I feel sometimes that there's a bit of barrier as far as communication goes. So I was just wondering how we as an industry in the HVAC industry could deal with cultural differences, language differences, especially when it comes to communication, as in our business, communication is so important. So I was just wondering if that was a topic that we could maybe discuss and throw out there for maybe a podcast or something else of that matter. So just what your thoughts were. Thank you.
I think it's more of a conversation than probably even a question. Obviously, you're highlighting some of the good and some of the challenge. The good is that it's really good for us as an industry to be more open and inclusive for a lot of reasons. First of all, we need more people in our trade. We're certainly not suffering from too much supply of quality workers. And so anybody who's willing and capable of doing the job, we need to be open to. And that's the practical reason. But there's also a deeper, I guess, moral reason. I think it is a moral imperative that we want to give people opportunity. And that's a huge part of what our country's about. Obviously, Manly's in Canada, but the same thing. We're about giving people opportunity and being excited and happy for people when they want to grow and improve or take on a new challenge. And I have the utmost respect for anyone who is willing to learn a second language. I mean, I don't know a second language. And so, of course, it's going to be challenging, especially if it's not something you learned when you were a kid, to take on a second language. Are there very real challenges associated with that? Yeah, there are. Obviously, you have somebody who speaks a different language as their first language. It's going to be more difficult for them to communicate in their second language. So there are things to consider there. And it really does depend on how tough it is for them to speak the language, how early on they are in their journey of learning it, whether or not you're going to be able to put them in a position where they're having money conversations with the client. But there are some things to think about. So here's some top tips, things I would suggest. Language and training support. So offering English as a second language classes as a benefit to people who have English as a second language, I think it makes a lot of sense and is a really great employee benefit to offer. Encouraging your team to be a little bit more clear and concise in communication, especially if you're using things like team chat or dispatch. in general, that's just a good idea. And so if you're using jargon or complicated terms, simplifying that is just a good idea anyway. There's a lot of really good translation tools nowadays that can help you communicate, especially more complicated concepts, and they're getting better and better. Obviously, it doesn't solve probably the customer interaction part as much, but having those available and knowing what they are, I think internally can help quite a bit. I also think supporting with really good documentation. So things, not necessarily scripts, but really good handouts, things that can support the conversation that your technicians are having is helpful for everybody, but especially people who maybe struggle with the language. Encouraging them to use photos, using more photo-based service tools. So that way you can show a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. And so using more of that is going to be helpful. But I think a couple things that are worth considering and embracing are, one, when you have people who have different backgrounds and speak different languages, that actually gives you more diversity in terms of clients that you can serve, because it's very likely that you're going to run into clients who also speak those languages. We find that a lot with our, especially Spanish-speaking technicians and workers, that we have a lot of Spanish-speaking clients. And so that helps quite a bit, actually, makes a big difference. And so that can actually be a positive thing. Also recognizing that every culture, and it is culture, this is not a racial thing, it's just cultures are different. They have different norms, they have different mindsets around certain things. There is value in that. Initially, when you have a very different perspective on things, and maybe a work culture or a culture in your company that is maybe one culture based, that can take a little bit to get used to and to see where the strengths and challenges are. And every culture has strengths and challenges when they're interacting with a different culture. It doesn't make it better, doesn't make it worse, just makes it different. Things that work one place don't necessarily work as well another place. I learned that very much when I went and worked in Haiti. It's just a very different culture, and the things that people value there are often quite different, but it is not necessarily worse. There are some real challenging things, obviously, it's proven in that society, but there's a lot of really good things too. And so being able to see that and being able to benefit from that's really important. What I don't advocate for is a mindless, careless, either protectionism or xenophobia, which basically says, well, if you can't speak the language or if you're not from here, you're not going to get what we do. Therefore, I keep you out. That's definitely not right. And then the other side is sort of a mindless and woke. And woke isn't necessarily, it's a word, right? But it's come to mean something. Mindset around diversity, where you do diversity for diversity's own sake. And I am a fan of people who come from differing backgrounds getting to know each other and learning from one another. In the context of a company, you have to still have standards. You have to have things that you consistently communicate to your clients, and that has to work. And so there are some cases where language or cultural barriers can be a challenge to overcome. And as a leader of a business, you have to take that head on. It can't just be this, oh, well, it's just diversity. It's something that you have to work with. But what I find is that the more you view people as individuals and you get to know them and you care about them as people and you care about their families, the more you're going to be able to tend to build bridges. But that doesn't mean it's always going to work, right? And that's not because they come from a different culture. That's just because a lot of people don't work out in our trade or in your business. And what you can't be afraid of, and this is what I sometimes see, is that when you bring in somebody, now you feel like you can't let them go or you can't give them feedback that might be difficult. And that can create a real negative within your business. And I would strongly encourage you, embrace diversity in the sense that you make space for people of a lot of different backgrounds, and you make space for people who don't speak the language perfectly, and you provide opportunity to those people. That, I think, is good business, and it also is something that good people do. On the flip side, being really honest about it, even with the person who you're talking to, about where you want them to get in terms of their language capabilities and some of the things that they need to work on if they want to continue to grow. I think that's also very healthy for a business owner to do, and not to be afraid. We don't need to be afraid if we're committed to doing the right thing. And that means that you care about your people and you want to take care of them within your organization, no matter where they come from. And you want to make space for people who are different than you. And as long as you know that that's true and you're working on that within yourself, you're working on some of those unconscious bias that we all have, where we naturally, humans are attracted to and tend to attract people who are more like themselves. That's proven. That's not a moral statement. That's just a reality. And once you know that, then you do need to work a little harder to say, no, I'm going to make space for this because this is good for my business and it's a good thing for society and it's good for this person. And in the end, it builds a stronger business. And we've seen that time and time again when we bring in people from different backgrounds, and it takes a little bit to figure it out. But we're not looking for pure assimilation either. We don't want people to just come in and be exactly like us, because what's the point in that? That's not what we're trying to do. We want to learn from them too. And there's a lot to learn from a lot of different people and a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different cultural traditions. And all of that, it's fun. It's super nice to get to know people who are different. I recently got to go down to the Cayman Islands and spend some time with a company down there, Polar Bear. And great people, just amazing, warm, bright, friendly, kind people who clearly love the place that they are and are still connected to the broader HVAC community. And that's a lot of fun. We had the same thing with a couple students in Africa who made some posts a while back, and a lot of folks from India and Australia and just a lot of different places. It makes us better when we can learn from and be interested in other people who aren't exactly like us, but still facing head on that there's challenges. There is challenges. And when you're a business owner, you have to face those. You have to be honest about those. So glad you're asking the question, Manly. I know I didn't really say anything too specific there. I gave a few little tips. But what is there to say? And I think we kind of know viscerally. There's always going to be people on both sides. There's going to be people who are real extreme that like keep people out who are different than us. And that's not right. We know that. And then there are going to be people on the other side that are just like, accept everything, embrace everything. It doesn't matter if they can't even put a sentence together, put them in the client's house. It's like, well, that's probably not going to work. You have to come up with a path for that. So you got to do this stuff eyes wide open, communicating with people like adults, treating them like adults, treating them as humans who are of inestimable, I don't know how to say that word. Inestimable, unestimatable. I don't know. How do you say that word? Value. There's no way to put a value on people. But as a business owner, you have to make choices that are going to serve your clients. They're going to serve your team. They're going to work well for everybody. And a big part of that is being open-minded to people who are different. Thanks, Manly. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time on the HVAC School Podcast.